Now, the clerk.
Private members' business. Notice number 1 for the Charter of Budget Honesty Amendment, Regional Australia Statements Bill 2015.
I call the member for Indi.
I present the Charter of Budget Honesty Amendment, Regional Australia Statements Bill 2015 and the explanatory memorandum.
I call the clerk.
First reading, a bill for an Act to amend the Charter of Budget Honesty Act 1998 and for related purposes.
I call the member for Indi.
I move that this bill be now read a second time. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to present a bill for an Act to amend the Charter of Budget Honesty Act 1998. This bill is to be known as the Charter of Budget Honesty Amendment, Regional Australia Statement Bill 2015. Mr Deputy Speaker, when I stood on my feet for the first time in this chamber on the 2nd of December 2013, I committed to listening to my community. I said that I would go anywhere in Indi to listen to people's concerns. I have listened, and I'm here to deliver the message from Indi. The message is simple. The government must demonstrate that it is listening to the people who live in regional Australia. This amendment bill answers the call from my community. It calls on the government, when formulating policy, to ensure that regional impact statements are prepared and accompany every budget every year. I also said that I would focus especially on those who live in more isolated rural areas, people who are disadvantaged because of poor public transport, patchy mobile phone coverage, terrible internet connections and fewer employment and educational opportunities. This amendment bill addresses this commitment. It gives voice to those who live in regional Australia, and it goes to the very heart of regional living. In regional Australia, government initiatives often have a disproportionate impact on communities due to the lack of infrastructure, and this is clearly evident when patchy and non-existent mobile phone coverage or internet connections and little or no access to public transport limit the day-to-day life of our communities. And the purpose of this bill is to call for regional Australia statements to provide information to allow the assessment of the impact of government policy decisions on regional Australia to be understood. Mr Deputy Speaker, the absence of a rural and regional ministerial statement in the 2014 and 15 budget caused great concern in my electorate and throughout regional Australia. And to my knowledge, this statement has been included in every budget since 1996-97, except for the 1 year of 2006 and 7. It has been sorely missed. Without this statement in the budget, people who live in regional Australia, in communities in Indi such as Wodonga, Wangaratta, Benalla and Alexandra, can't be sure that their needs have been taken into account in the creation of the budget. And using the 2014-15 budget as an illustration, co-payments for doctors' visits, changes to the funding for higher education, changes to pensions, changes to allowances for young people, changes to the price of petrol, to name just a few, all had significant negative impacts on the people who live in regional Australia. And it is the intention of this legislation to avoid repetition of these circumstances in the future and to ensure that the people who live in regional Australia can have full confidence that the government has taken into account all the circumstances relevant to their lives when it makes important decisions. And so to the bill before us tonight. In summary, the purpose of the amendments are to ensure that the framework for the conduct of government fiscal policy, which includes obligations on the government of regular financial reporting, including an obligation to publicly release and table a regional Australia statement with each budget economic and fiscal outlook report and each mid-year economic and fiscal outlook report. The major elements of the bill are as follows. Item 1 proposes an obligation upon the Treasurer to publicly release and table regional Australia statements together with each budget and MyEFO. Item 2 inserts a new Part 5A Regional Australia Statement. Section 19B outlines the purpose of Regional Australia statements being to provide information to allow the assessment of the impact of government decisions on regional Australia. Section 19C details the contents of these statements, including the likely economic, social, cultural and environmental impacts on regional Australia of key government initiatives. Specifically, it includes the likely impacts on regional Australia of key government initiatives or significant changes to such initiatives since the last mid-year economic and fiscal outlook report was released or connected with the budget. It calls on reports to be made about process made in implementing key government initiatives that are likely to have an impact on regional Australia. It calls for a regional Australia statement to be prepared having regard to the following: the economic, social, cultural, environmental impacts of government initiatives, the economic drivers of regional communities, the disproportionate effect that government initiatives may have on regional communities due to the lack of infrastructure, including mobile phone coverage, reliable internet connections and access to public transport, the lack of access that people living in regional communities have to government services, particularly due to cost, long travelling distance and time, and the effect that lack of competition in regional communities has on the cost of living and doing business in regional communities, and the cost and difficulties involved in complying with regulatory requirements for people and businesses in regional communities. And finally, Section 19D allows for the Treasurer to request Commonwealth bodies to provide information to help in the preparation of regional Australia statements. Mr Deputy Speaker, there has been extensive consultation on this proposed legislation, including with colleagues in this place on both sides of the House. Stakeholder groups in the telecommunications, transport, health, education, agriculture, environment and human service areas are strongly supportive of this initiative. And at this point, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge and thank my staff, the volunteers in my office and the clerks in the House for their help in preparing this legislation. My voice is the voice of regional Australia, and in this bill, the voice of regional Australia is loud and clear to the government. I call on the government to acknowledge the impact that government decisions have on regional Australia, and I call on the government to commit to this bill by publicly releasing and tabling regional Australia statements with every budget and my EFO. Intended results of this legislation are that it improves knowledge and understanding of the impact of fiscal and budgetary measures upon the community, and that as a result of greater information and understanding, there is more confidence and trust in government and in government's ability and willingness to govern for all Australians, and that with greater trust and confidence there will be increased participation in our democracy and a willingness to take on leadership positions necessary to advance this great nation of ours. I commend this bill to the House.
I thank the member for Indi. Is the motion seconded?
Deputy Speaker, I second the honourable member for Indi's most excellent bill. I commend her for her refreshing commitment to regional Australia, and I reserve my right to speak.
I thank the member for Denison. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. However, the time allotted for this debate has expired. The debate is adjourned and resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. The Clerk.
Private members